Shalom. Shalom, Boker Tov. Ani ken Rubin neimot. So, since I haven't yet learned to speak Hebrew unless you want me to bless the wine, I've gone as far as I can go. So now in Anglit. Thank you for having me. I'm pleased to be here. Came in yesterday from the United States. And I'm going to go right to it. We have 1 hour and a lot of material to cover. I'll just briefly provide background so you understand my perspective. My degrees are all in computer science, typical path through software companies, developer, project manager, VP of engineering. I've run a number of small software companies, done 9 startups in my career, took 2 of them public on the markets in the US, spent 2 years with IBM doing big system development. I've been doing Agile since the early 1990s. If anybody here is an old developer, I come out of the Smalltalk world, help bring Smalltalk out of the research labs at Xerox PARC in the Silicon Valley. So I mean, Agile since the early 90s, Scrum since 2000. I was working with a startup called Genomica. We built software for statistical genetics, some sophisticated life sciences stuff. For the past 13 years now, I've been full-time Agile coach and trainer. So I travel around the world, teach classes, and work with a lot of companies, helping them adopt Agile. This presentation is based on the work I've been doing with a large number of companies, helping them transition to Agile. I did write a book on Scrum. There's a copy on one of the tables here. Don't be impressed, I wrote it in English. They just translated it into 9 other languages. So if you're native to one of the other languages, feel free. This is our agenda for today. 4 topics, to discuss. First, I want to talk about the evolution of Agile scaling. And based on that, I want to talk about how we do Agile end-to-end agility, what some people call business agility. So we're going to go into detail. I need to talk about dependencies that exist among various teams and how it affects our ability to do end-to-end agility. I want to talk about a concept called the whole group. Some people might call it the product group. I'll define what I mean by that. And then lastly, some of the impediments, some of the roadblocks that get in the way of organizations trying to adopt Agile at large scale. So let's begin. If you think about the evolution of scaling, it began first with just single team Agile. So back in 2000, when we were doing Scrum, it was all about how do you take one team and make them very effective at doing Scrum. And for a long time, that was the focus. Almost all the approaches to agility thought about one team. Then the next phase came in. What happens when we work on larger things, where you need more than one team? How do we get them to collaborate? So we moved on to sort of multiple collaborating Agile teams. And honestly, today, even when most people say Agile at scale, what they mean is multiple collaborating Agile teams. I'm going to suggest that we need to be somewhere else. We need to be what I'll call full end-to-end agility. Full end-to-end, not just across development teams, but across the entire business. I'm going to illustrate. If you think of most organizations, Agile enters typically in the development or the IT part of the organization. That's the normal home for Agile to enter an organization. But that group, development or IT, has to operate in a larger context. Right? So finance, HR, sales, marketing, operations. So we're going to say that first it enters through dev and IT, but that can't be where we stop. So let's start at the beginning. We start with bringing Agile into IT. Maybe we embrace one team Scrum. So one backlog, one Scrum team. It doesn't get any better than that. Right? It's easy to implement, easy to understand. We could go a little further. We could have multiple Scrum teams. Each team has its own backlog. they're not collaborating, they're working on different things, but we're just doing multiple instances of single team Scrum. That's still Agile in the small. I hope you agree. If you can't do Agile in the small, you have no hope of doing Agile in the large. So starting here is a reasonable place to prove that in our organization we can do one team Scrum. But let's say we're good at that. Now what? Let's do multiple team Scrum. So now I work on something big. I need something that requires more than 5 to 9 people to do. So I create multiple Scrum teams, multiple Agile teams, and they have to collaborate. When these teams collaborate, they can focus either on building pieces of the overall system. So a team might work on an individual component. Eventually, those would have to be integrated to provide the solution, or they might, by their very nature, focus on the whole product, right? The whole product being all the pieces that have to come together, not just individual components. But still, it's just multiple collaborating Scrum teams in the development or IT area. What I'm trying to suggest is that it really is myopic to think of Agile only here. Sort of Rosh Katan, small thinking. Right? We need to go beyond this approach to doing things. What I really want to do, because again, it's still about how do I do multiple collaborating teams just in IT. But what about all the other parts of the organization that have to collaborate in order to have that whole product solution? What we need is full end-to-end business agility. Now, for the past 5 years, I've been working with companies, typically large companies. For example, I'm working with the largest bank in the United States, and we're transforming the entire credit card group. This is 6,000 people over to using Scrum. And if all we did was focus on dev or IT, that would be focusing in the small. We need to focus in the large. So I want to look at how can we do Agile across all of this, right? Rosh Gadol, thinking with the big head, not with the small head. Think where the problems might be. I wonder how many of these are familiar to you. If you think about the different parts of the organization and how they might see Agile, right? So dev and IT, we're Agile, right? We brought Agile in there first, but marketing. Do you work in an organization where your marketing team has to know the complete set of requirements up front and the date that the product is going to ship? And they're asking you to do that on the first day of the project, the day you have the worst possible knowledge you will ever have. Would you agree on the first day we begin working on a project, that's the day we'll know the least we will ever know about that project? And that every day after that we should know a little bit more? Right, but they're asking for that up front. Or the sales team keeps selling more work and pushing it into the system, completely overwhelming our WIP limit, our work in progress limits to do this. So with all of this going on, all these different groups, how do we bring it all together? How do we try to embrace full end-to-end agility? Because that is where the real value is. Just being able to produce more output from development doesn't mean the business will get better outcomes. We should be focused on outcome, not output. Let me give you an example of what is not end-to-end agility. So when I go into a larger company, one of the first things I'll do is a value stream map. That's just a fancy way of saying we map out the flow of the work for a particular project or product. Now, this isn't the actual example picture of the company I'm about to describe. I'm not allowed to use their picture in public. It's a little embarrassing. By the way, the real picture has about 3 times the number of Post-it notes, and it would go onto the other screen in terms of its length. So here's what happens. We start with an idea, ideation. Someone has an idea for a new product, new set of features, and we take it all the way through, in this case, the first partial delivery. All right, now in this case, that took 14 months to go from idea to delivery. Now look at where IT is. The amount of time this particular process was focused on development work, basically there. So if all we did was focus on how do we make more IT more efficient at using Scrum, at using Agile, we would have missed the bigger part of this picture. Most of the problems were over here. And worse yet is that 90% of the time in that picture, the work is blocked. It's not moving. This is typical. I'll do pictures like this maybe 4 or 5 times a year with different companies. Every time I've done it, every time, the work is blocked roughly 90% of the time or more. That means 90% of that 14 months, nothing is happening. So if you want to find the easy waste to eliminate in the full end-to-end agility of companies, if all we did was focus on the IT group and how to make them more efficient, how to get them to produce twice as much in half the time, we'd miss the point. You have to squeeze the entire value chain down. So we're going to have to deal with this problem. Now, why was the work blocked 90% of the time? Dependencies. Okay. So here's a product backlog in the upper left. That has features in it, something of recognizable value to our customers. So for example, a feature, something a customer wants to buy. Now, if I had a team that could build features, I would just give this to the team and say, please build this. In this picture, I don't. What I have are 3 component teams. Component teams 1, 2, and 3. They each have a backlog. CA number 1 PB, component area number 1 product backlog. So here's basically what has to happen in this picture. I have to take the Post-it note, and I have to tear it into 3 pieces. And I have to give a piece to each of these teams, right? Because those teams only work on their area, and this represents, their area. And what will happen is these 3 teams might be running Scrum in parallel. They'll each design, build, and test their piece, right? The other teams will have to design, build, and test their pieces. These pieces will then have to get integrated back together, fully end-to-end tested, and this is what finally would get delivered. Because customer doesn't want this. Customer doesn't even know what this is. This is something about APIs or something. They know what this is. Now, if I only had one item that had to be split across 3 teams, no problem. We can solve that. Totally solvable problem. The issue, of course, is we don't have that problem. See, now I have a second product backlog, and it has features that span the component areas. Take another Post-it note. Obviously, this has to get torn into its pieces as well. Now the situation is a little bit more complicated, right? Because each of these teams will get 2 pieces of Post-it notes. In their backlog, there would have to be a product owner there. Now, there'll be a product owner for each of the others as well. Now there's a question. The first question the product owner has to answer is, what order do you want to do them in? This order or that order? All right, that's not the hardest thing to decide. There's only 2 of them, but they have to do them in the right order while simultaneously coordinating with the other product owners that have to do their 2 in the right order. Everybody has to do the right thing at the right time so that at the end of the sprint, I get back 2 fully reassembled Post-it notes, end-to-end tested, ready to deliver. And if all we had was 2 Post-it notes, we could still solve that problem. What if you had 15? Think if this sounds like your company now. If I tore up 15 Post-it notes, and each of these backlogs now had 15 little pieces of Post-it note in it, answer this question. If you're the product owner, how will you simultaneously prioritize the 15 competing requests to make changes in your component area? Do them in the right order while coordinating with all the other product owners who have to do their 15 pieces in the right order, have everybody do the right thing at exactly the right time so that all those pieces magically come back together, fully reassembled, fully tested, and delivered at the end of the sprint. Good luck. At scale, you cannot solve this problem. Right? The math is not on your side. The math's not on your side to solve this problem. The probability, right, of delivering on time goes up exponentially. The formula, 1/2 to the n, where n is the number of dependencies. So for example, if there's 6 dependencies, if I had to split it across 6 different teams, there's a 1 in 64 chance we'll actually get it done. Last week, I was with a company. They showed me a plan that they had for building a particular feature. It required 15 different teams to coordinate. And they're like, we can never get these done. I'm like, I'll tell you why you can't. You have a 1 out of 32,768 probability, 2 to the 15th power rather, of getting this done. The fact that you ever get anything done is a miracle, right, with the odds that bad. So there's only one solution at scale. Don't do this, right? Because you can't win this game. So let's take it forward. The problem isn't so much the number of dependencies. I know my team is dependent on your team. That's not magic. I know that your team has to do something or my team will be blocked. What I don't know is when. I don't have any guarantee as to when your team will do the work. It's the asynchronicity that's killing me. So that is what I need to deal with. It's the large number of dependencies with the asynchronous aspect of when people will do work that makes this totally unpredictable at scale. So how do we manage this? So I'm going to show you some patterns. Here's different patterns. I'm going to quickly walk you through them. Most of them are going to be completely obvious to you. Some of them are don't ever do these patterns, right? The ones in red in particular. The green ones tend to be a little bit better. The top ones are inter-team dependencies, dependencies between teams. The bottom 2 are intra-team dependencies, dependencies within a team. And then at the end, we'll talk about T-shaped skills. Dedicated capacity. Big companies love this pattern, and it's a horrible pattern to use. Here's how it works. Somehow, at the beginning of the year, we're supposed to figure out all the work that we need to do. So in this case, we have a development team that needs to work with a legal team. Remember, we're trying to go across the organization, not just IT. You know, maybe we develop a medical system, and the legal people have to review the language that comes up in the dialogue boxes, right? So I need constant access to lawyers to review this language, or maybe to write the language that goes in there. So what do? We anticipate the sum of all the time we'll need from legal next year is 800 hours. Heaven knows how they figured that out, but somehow they calculated 800 hours of need for legal. They go over to the legal team and they say, over the course of the next year, can you guarantee us 800 hours of work? And they're like, yes. That's dedicated capacity. They don't guarantee you when you'll get your 800 hours or who will actually do the work, but you'll get 800 hours. This model almost never works. First, it requires you to predict you need 800 hours. That means you have to understand the full body of work up to 15 months in advance, because this is usually done in the third quarter of the fiscal year for the next year, right? And it assumes nothing's going to change. In an Agile world, we assume things will change, not that they will remain static. So, bad idea. We could try to improve on that by asking for a named person, a named individual. Not only do I want 800 hours from your legal team, I want Ravi to provide it. He's the person who should do the work on our behalf. And legal says, fine, 800 hours of Ravi's time next year, yes, we'll make it available. Again, this makes all the same assumptions. First, I assume I can figure out I need 800 hours at the beginning of the year, or even earlier, and that somehow that Ravi's going to be available during the year to do it, when I need him to do it. So this doesn't tend to work well either. The third is maybe we can get some agreement that Ravi will work on our items with high priority, expedited priority. So I require 800 hours from Ravi, and the guarantee from the legal team is that Ravi will do our work with high priority. It doesn't mean he'll necessarily stop working on whatever he's doing right now if we make the request, but it'll probably be the next thing he does after he completes what he's working on. Still, not likely to solve our problems. Let's try something different. Maybe we run Kanban systems. A Kanban system with a normal class of service associated with it. In this case, what we do is we have to pull off, still have to pull off the work for the legal team. We put it in here, but the legal team has an SLA, a service level agreement. Right? If you give us a piece of work that's normal priority, we will get it done within 7 days with an 85% probability. That's what a Kanban SLA would look like. And we're like, that works for us. If we get things done in 7 days, that's fine. Then, okay, then maybe this model would work. Or maybe we could go to the expedited model. Right? In Kanban, you can have different classes of service. So maybe we have an expedited high priority class of service. So this would be, hey, we guarantee you in 4 days, we can get that done with an 85% probability. Again, if that meets our needs, that might work for us. Or we could try to cluster teams. Maybe what I do is I say, I have a team over here and a team over here, and they have to collaborate a lot. Maybe what I do is I bring them together into a higher level unit. Here we'll just call it a cluster. And the key piece here is that cluster has a common product owner. So that when I get to that issue before about, hey, how do I guarantee that you're going to do this when I need you to do this? Well, no, I have one product owner who can simply state to both teams, this is the order in which I would like you to do them. So that could be better. So intra-cluster. And finally, maybe what we could do is just move somebody up. So maybe what I do is I take Ravi off of the legal team and I simply move him up and put him onto the product team. So rather than having to pull a piece of work, right, in this picture you'll notice on the product backlog item, I'm not tearing the piece off anymore. I simply give the entire piece of work to the product team. It requires legal work on it, but that's okay because my team has a lawyer on it now. And so all of that work can be done within the team. And I've now eliminated a dependency on another team by not having to deal with that. So we embed them in. And then one final pattern here would be we'd have Ravi actually report into the product team. In the previous picture, he still reported to the legal manager. But in the next picture, he actually reports into the product team like everybody else at some level. So these are different patterns we can start to apply to try to reduce the dependency problem that was causing all of this delay. It's never quite as easy as it sounds. Usually you end up with something like this. It'll be a hybrid model. So you have this idea of, here's our legal backlog and our legal team. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll actually put a lawyer up onto a team because that makes sense. Usually because there's a lot of need for the lawyer. I need this lawyer 80% of the time on this team, so just make them a member of the team. What if you only need the lawyer 20% of the time? You don't really want to move somebody up to that team if we only need them 20% of the time, so maybe we keep them here as well. And for those examples, we still break the work off and put it into the backlog. So in large organizations, you almost always have a hybrid model. The thing you want to remember here is there is no perfect solution at scale. There are only compromises. And what we have to decide is which compromises we're prepared to make and which ones we're not prepared to make. Okay. Now, a lot of these approaches, like if I put somebody up, if I move somebody up off of a team and put them onto a product team, the hope is that they start to T-shape their skills. So the idea behind T-shaping is that everybody should be deep in some area, and they would be broad in other areas. Meaning, if you were hired into the company, and we still had business cards today, whatever would be on your business card would be this, would be the deep vertical skill. So if you were hired to do testing, testing is your deep vertical skill, development, deep vertical skill, whatever. T-shaping means, wouldn't it be nice if, in addition to a deep vertical skill, people had some additional skills, they just weren't as deep in those skills. The benefit of T-shaping people up on the team is it makes the team more resilient when things go wrong. Because if only one person on your team can do this, and that person is on holiday or gets sick, then we may not get the job done. If I have people with T-shaped skills, then very likely I have another person who can do the work. So moving them up and T-shaping helps me with the problem of, I only need this person 80% of the time. What are they going to do with the other 20% of their time? They'll T-shape, and they'll do other forms of work. And that makes it a little bit easier when you're talking to the people who control the budgets as to why this is a sensible thing to do. So I'm more about T-shaping in a little bit. And as I've been talking about, in practice, you'll need multiple patterns that I just described in any one large company. One pattern will never be the solution. It's going to be a combination. You'll just need to figure out the proper combination. Okay. So with dependencies now understood, how do we structure at scale? Welcome to the whole group. Sometimes called the product group. Here's a thought experiment, because I need to figure out what should be inside this whole group. Imagine I was going to take part of your company, spin it off into its own startup. And I told you, if I spin this off, please take with you all the people and all the technologies you would need so that tomorrow, outside the company, you'll be up and running with equal capacity, equal capability that you have today. So that's the thought experiment. We're going to spin that off as a separate entity. Take the people, take the technology, so you're running tomorrow. That starts to look like this. So we have our company, it's organizational structure. The whole group starts to pull from them all the people and the systems that we need, with the primary goal of making most of the dependencies now intra-whole group. So rather than having to go outside of this group to get work done, all of the people necessary to do the work, or at least most of them, are now within the whole group. Okay? Stay with me, it gets a little bit more interesting on this. This is what a whole group structure tends to look like. So I've been implementing this with multiple companies over the past few years. Upper left, that's our product owner, because every whole group or whole product should have a single identifiable product owner. that owns that. And by the way, I mean, this group, at one organization where I'm doing this group has 350 people in it. A combination of business and development people brought together in the whole group to focus on one product idea. Now, when things get big like that, 350 people, it tends to subdivide into areas, like area 1, area 2, because it's a natural partition of the bigger entity into smaller pieces. And within each of those areas, there's a product owner. Call them an area product owner, if you'd like. And they have a set of teams that are aligned with that area. Remember the put together a cluster of teams so that the dependencies remain within the cluster? Well, now I have a common product owner who oversees that area and can organize and manage to the dependencies in that area. And you'll notice the to-do, doing, done. For those who are familiar with Kanban, that's a simple structure of a Kanban board. You tend to have, at large scale like this, we tend to have a mix of things like Scrum and Kanban in the same area. The Kanban systems there tend to focus on business functions that don't necessarily have to have development teams aligned with them. For example, paying invoices. In one of the areas we stood up, they had to pay invoices. They had partnerships. Partners would submit invoices, and people in that area would have to pay the invoices. Well, it follows a natural flow. Invoices arrive, they get reviewed, they get submitted for payment, they get approved. It's a Kanban system. And there are people that align with that. So if you say, why did I get put into the product group? Because if I was spinning you out as a company, you'd still have to pay invoices tomorrow, and people still have to do that, and we're trying to get full end-to-end agility across all the functions, not just development, so that this entire system functions in an agile way. Same thing with area 2. And the bottom part is there oftentimes is an operational system that cuts across all the areas. So an operational Kanban system. If anybody's interested in more at the break, I can give you more details on what that looks like. And then 2 other groups, internal support and external. Internal support is a group of people who reside inside the whole group that assist the product owner. It could be like a lead architect, right? It's a group of people that help the product owner do this job at large scale. And then the external support group, some companies call this the product cabinet. Much like in the US, the president has his cabinet, right, to help do things. It's external people that provide input to help guide the work. Legal, compliance, risk, groups like that have to weigh in on decisions being made. So now we have a structure for doing end-to-end agility at scale where we're starting to move the dependencies inside that one structure, right, to try to minimize the effect of blockage in the system. Now, of course, if you're a larger company, you won't just have one of these. You could have multiple whole groups or multiple product groups. Right, the company I'm working with right now, we've already stood up 3. We expect we'll have, by the time we're done, 15 whole product groups. Remember, one of them was 350 people large. They won't all be that large. One of them's going to be bigger. Others will probably be more like 150 to 200 people. But they're substantial. And what you'll find is that we'll have to stand them up over time, of course. All right, now, how do you identify them? How do you know what is the proper thing to be one of these whole groups? So you'll have to choose some kind of unit for deciding this. Projects, I put it in red because projects are a horrible unit of focus. So if your company has a list of projects you're working on, I'd like to suggest that you rethink that. Right? You're going to see very quickly why. I mean, but projects fail on almost every characteristic that's interesting to us. First, they're not long-lived. Projects start, and we hope at some point they actually end. That's the whole point of being a project. So I don't want to start aligning an organizational structure against something that's going away. I need to align it with something that's going to be there for a period of time. So maybe it's products. Maybe we should create one of these whole groups for a product, in which case maybe you would call it a product group. Could be capabilities, could be value streams. If you're in a world where you do customer journeys, maybe customer journeys, which are long-lived, could be your product, could be your focus. Here's some of the characteristics I would use to figure that out. First, whatever you're going to choose as a target, you should be able to identify a single product owner to oversee that. So if we're going to say this is going to be our whole group, then I should be able to ask you who will be the product owner of that group. Somebody who's an individual, not a team. Don't tell me what the team is, tell me the person who's going to do it. And this isn't a part-time job, this is a full-time job for that person to do it. In most organizations, this is vice president or higher in level. This is not a junior level person, because we're talking about a substantial part of the organization. And this person's fully empowered, right? They have to direct all the people that are in that group, which is why they can manage internal dependencies. Because if they say, your team and your team need to work together this sprint to get it done, I'm telling you this is the order I want the work done in, they can solve that problem. So they have to be fully empowered to make that decision. Okay, the backlog associated with that whole group needs to be cohesive, meaning the items in the backlog should make sense to be in that backlog together. It makes a cohesive product, if you'd like. So they have a natural affinity to one another. It should deliver something valuable from a customer's perspective, right? So if I'm going to form these things like a whole product, I should be able to have my customers go, yeah, that's something I would buy. It's a service I would use. So it has to be valuable. It should be a good unit for fiscal control, to control the money, right? Because what's going to happen is internal stakeholders, our management, are going to allocate a budget. See, we don't fund individual projects anymore. You fund the groups, the whole groups. So it has to be a fundable unit, and you're basically telling that product owner, here's your $20 million for next year, and I will hold you fully accountable for how that money gets spent. But it's your money to spend, which means if you want to dynamically reallocate how the money gets spent inside of your group, you don't have to come and ask permission, because it's your money. You should spend it however you see best. And then it has to be the right size. This is a silly example to demonstrate the extremes. I wouldn't create a group for an individual class method. That'd be ridiculously small. Neither would I do it for the entire company unless it was a small startup company, in which case that would make perfect sense. But a large company with thousands of people, no, it'd be way too big. We need it to be just the right size. And what does that mean? The right size to minimize the cost of organizing the teams, doing the budgeting, doing the planning, right? Getting approvals. And not just up front, because remember, on the first day, the day that we have the worst possible knowledge, we're not going to get it right. So when we have to rework the budgets and the plans and all that, that we're minimizing the cost of doing the rework and minimizing the waste that went with that. So it has to be the right size to handle budgeting, approvals, planning, and team organization. And it has to allow us to sensibly inspect and adapt, meaning I should be able to get meaningful feedback so that as an organization, it could guide us to change direction or not based on what we learned. Okay, so right size. And then finally, isolated, meaning the whole point was to pull all those people into one group so that most of the dependencies occurred within the group. So I want the interdependencies between the groups to be very, very small. It doesn't mean occasionally we may not ask another group to do something, but that should be the exception. Because if it's not, then why didn't I pull those people into my group to make it an intra-group dependency as opposed to inter-team dependency. So they have to be isolated. And then back to all those patterns from earlier on dependencies, this is how we would try to apply them. I won't walk through all those, but you'll have a copy of the slides and you can see it for reference. Basically, you want to get down into here, to the bottom part of the slide for managing most of your dependencies. Okay. Let's get to the last piece because I want to make sure there's time for questions. So maybe this sounds good, but there are problems that come with trying to do this. As I said, there is no perfect solution at scale. Well, first of all, we're going to be in a hybrid environment. If you're in I'm assuming a larger organization. If you're a small company of 50 people, 100 people, and you decide you're going to go end-to-end Agile, just do it. Just do it. I mean, 50 to 100 people, that's a quick thing to do to reorganize yourself to get the right kind of flow. I'm talking about larger entities where doing it all at once, not practical. It just isn't. So we have to stage it. Maybe we stand up one product group in the first quarter, and then we're planning to stand up another one in the second quarter and the third quarter. That means we're in this hybrid world. Some of it is end-to-end aligned. A lot of it isn't. So we have to operate in both ways for some period of time, maybe forever. Maybe we're never going to go full end-to-end on the organization. So we have to deal with how are we going to handle that? How will that affect planning? How will that affect budgeting? What about the dependencies? Some of these things will still have dependencies on other teams. So we'll have to manage that. And what about all this budgeting? Maybe some of this looks familiar to how you do budgeting in your organization. Right, usually, most organizations try to budget once a year for the whole year. Let's do the annual budgeting cycle. Oh, I love this. This stuff is just crazy to me, right? So look at, maybe some of these look familiar, right? Here's the spreadsheet, right? This is the one that's like showing every project that we might ever want to work on with cost estimates, an idea of what resourcing we would need on it. This is all being done when we have very poor information. At one organization I visited, I'm not joking, this spreadsheet had 8,600 items in it. Each one took about 14 months. You do the math and figure out how many centuries of work that represents, right? How does that make any sense to do it? And it gets worse. In order to put our estimates on those, which most organizations do, they want to know how many hours of effort will this project require? Well, then they start putting project plans together so they could figure out, right, how many hours of effort is it going to require. So you look at all of this planning inventory that gets created. Now, when things start changing, you have to now go in and update all of that work. This is exactly what we're trying to avoid, is doing stuff like this. All right, so remember, we could still be in a hybrid world, so I have to deal with the fact that there's this annual planning cycle, but in Agile, we don't really want to plan that way. But still answer this question. You create that whole group over here, 350 people. How much money should they get next year? And how should you answer that question? Are we just headcount neutral from the previous year? Well, last year you had 350 people. I'll fund 350 people this year, right? I'm neutral, not going up, not going down, same number of people. Okay, that might be an easy way. It may not be the right answer, but it would be easy to figure out what the budget should be. Or is it business case driven? If it is, I hope it's not based on projects, because then I have that roll up of 8,600 projects again to try to answer a question that I'm just going to get wrong. Or the more agile way of doing it is horizon-based budgeting. Let's say we come up with a number, and I say to the product owner, where do you plan to spend this money? I kind of expect in the first quarter, they have real good visibility. In the first quarter of 2020, I can pretty much tell you where I'm planning to spend the money. In the second quarter, maybe I can tell you where I think 80% of the money will be spent. 20% I don't know, right? Because things change and I need the ability to maneuver. Maybe by the third quarter it's 60%. And if you want to know where I'm going to spend the budget in Q4, remember, I know what my budget is. It's fixed at that point. The question I'm trying to answer is, where will I spend it? It might be, I could probably tell you 40%. Some of that's just keeping the lights on money, right? Business as usual money. The other 60%, I don't know, but I'll figure it out. But remember, as product owner, you gave me the budget and you're going to hold me accountable for how it got spent. So if I don't do a good job, then that'll come back to me. So I have to handle budgeting in this environment. You have to prioritize. We have to figure out how to prioritize in this environment. And most organizations, it's something like return on investment or 5-year net present value calculations. But I mean, how do I know that this thing is more important to do than this thing? I mean, I'm going to give you an example. It's your money. I come into your office and I say, fund my project. And you go, why? And I say, well, mine will generate $500,000 in revenue in Q2. Like, okay. Someone else walks in, no, you should fund my project. Why? Mine will increase customer satisfaction by 5%. Which one's better? Which one should we fund? The one that's going to generate $500,000 in Q2, or the one that improves customer satisfaction by 5%? I don't know. They're not in the same units to be compared, right? One is in dollars and the other is in customer satisfaction units. So how do you solve this problem? You have to convert all these different units into a common unit. And the common unit is lifecycle profits. Lifecycle profit, the total profit potential of a product over its accounting lifetime, 3 years, 5 years, whatever that might be. So now we convert. So if the person with customer sat comes in, I would say this, 5% increase, that sounds really good. Tell me, what is a 1% increase in customer satisfaction worth in life cycle profit? And if the person's like, I don't know, I'm like, okay, go away. No, come back when you have an answer to that question. Because what if we do enough investigation and we learn that every 1% increase is worth $1 million? Okay, now I understand what a 5% increase in customer satisfaction is worth. Same thing with the revenue person. Convert that into profit, right? Revenue does not equal profit, right? Convert the two in, now I can compare them very, very quickly. We need to have a single unit of measure for doing the prioritization across all these different products. So that's what this is referring to. Some of the other issues you're going to run into. Well, let's say we move this guy Ravi up and we put him up on the development team. That's good. So he's assigned to work up there, but he still reports to the legal manager. What happens when the legal manager wants Ravi to do some work that the product team doesn't require? Basically, he's being pulled in two directions. You're a member of the team at the top, and therefore you should get your work by being a member of the team. But you also have your manager over there saying, I want you to go work on some other things. So this was, we said we embedded people in. That was one of the dependency patterns. We said that the next step was reporting into the team, and the reason for that next step was to avoid this problem. Because if he still reports to the same manager, there could be a conflict. Although in most companies, we have to start with this pattern because people don't like to give up people who directly report to them. It makes them feel less of a manager because they have fewer people reporting. So usually we start with we'll embed them in, they'll still report to you, and then over time, move the reporting up. But we could have this problem in the short term. We can start to deplete the shared services teams. This is a real issue, right? So every time we spin up a new group, we pulled a person off of that legal team and we put them on this group. And then we pulled the next person off to put them on the second group. Third person, next thing you know, that legal team's getting smaller and smaller. They may not have sufficient capacity to do the work required by the rest of the organization. So we're gonna have to find a balance, because eventually the manager of that legal group's gonna say, no more. You can't take any more of my people, or I won't be able to operate as a legal group any further. Again, balance. All right, now T-shaping. We said T-shaping was important, and I hope that made sense, the discussion on T-shaping. The problem is, it's a little difficult to achieve it. And a lot of organizations that I've been working with have formal plans to try to get people more broadly skilled. First, you certainly have to have management support, but you can't dictate it. At one company, management tried to set a number. This is how many skills people should have on, within the organization. That rarely will work, right? The team members themselves have to be responsible. If it's not clear what that sounds like, imagine you're at a sprint planning meeting and you're the person. So Danko can do it twice as fast as I can. He can do the task work twice as, you all know that already, but he can do it twice as fast as I can. But I want to learn it so I can broaden my T-shaped skills. So when we're at the planning meeting, I might go, hey, if it's okay with you, I'd like to work on that task this time so I can start to learn better that area. But we as a team have to understand that we're going to go a little bit slower, right? Because he can do it twice as fast as I can, but we see the value of me doing it. Because next time, he's not here at the office, out sick or something, I might be able to do that work. So we need a plan for doing this. Okay. Didn't expect this one to happen, but when it did, it caused a huge problem for us. So we moved a person up from a technology area and said, this team needs somebody from this technology area. So took them off a component team, moved them up. And we're trying to T-shape the skills of the people to the right over there with the T on their chest. So the person who we moved up was already a member of this team, and they had the ability to go in and modify the code. They had the access credentials to log in and do it. The other people don't. So we're T-shaping them up, and we say, hey, we need these people to go in and be able to edit the code. And basically, we couldn't get them the credentials to log in. They wouldn't give it to them. I'm like, why not? You know why? Because these people are trusted to make the changes, and they're afraid that if those two new people who are being skilled up don't know what they're doing, they could make a big problem down here. And it turned out in this company, whichever team owns the component, if it fails in production, the cost of fixing it comes back to your team. So if they let those two people up there get in the code and they break it, that team at the top doesn't own the cost of repair. This team owns the cost of repair. So the answer was no. No, we won't give credentials to those people. So here we are working hard to T-shape people, get them up to speed, and all of a sudden this impediment shows up of, yeah, nice job. We're still not going to let them touch the code. So obviously we had to work through this with management, especially when it came to how costs were being allocated. You're going to architecturally probably be in a hybrid world as well. Most organizations have some legacy architecture, maybe a typical 3-tier architecture. Maybe they want to move to a more modern architecture, more microservices based or otherwise. Well, I'm here, maybe partially there, and I have to support both. It's not like I go to one immediately. So I'm forming these whole groups. Whole groups kind of want to work in this way, but they have to deal with the fact that the architecture, at least some of it, lives that way. So we need to have a transition plan. It won't be pretty either. And then last slide. We want to set up communities of practice Because if we start pulling people out of their normal team, if I take a legal person off the legal team and move them up, they're still a lawyer, and they still need to be a member of the legal community of practice. If I move testers off of a testing team and put them up onto a full feature team, they're still a member of the testing community. So I need to act as a community of testers or a community of lawyers or whatever the community is. And so we have to really set up these communities of practice, and we have to answer questions like, is there a leader of that community? Oftentimes it's the functional manager. The QA manager is the manager of the community of practice of QA people, things like that, right? And so we really do need to think about the overall structures here. Okay, let me pause, and since that was the last, that's just my contact information. Danko, do we have time for any questions? Nope. What was it? Okay. Then let me say thank you. I appreciate you having me over.